Good afternoon and welcome everyone to Center for Spiritual Living Ocala. I am Reverend Cindy Grimes and I am so glad that you are watching this broadcast with us today, whether you're live or watching later on. I want to just tell you a little bit about who we are. If this is your first time joining us, it's important to know what an organization values, and that is what I'm going to share with you right now so you can get a sense of who we are. At Center for Spiritual Living Ocala, these are the things that we value as a community. We value spiritual growth and practice. We value love, appreciation, community, freedom, creativity, health and wholeness, generosity, and financial well-being. These are all of the things that are important to us. And you see that spiritual growth and practice are at the top of the list because that is the foundation for everything that comes after. We believe that we are spiritual beings having a human experience. And our mission at the Center for Spiritual Living is to provide spiritual tools and practices for personal and global transformation. Now, we are part of a larger organization. There are over 350 centers for spiritual living located all over the world. And this is the mission of the larger organization. And our purpose is to awaken humanity to its spiritual magnificence, meaning that we believe we all come into this world as divine, perfect expressions of the One. And somewhere along the line, many of us forget that. And our work at the Center for Spiritual Living is to remind people of that truth. And so every month we have a different theme at CSL Ocala. And this year we are doing a program called the Revolutionary Love Project that comes from the work of Valerie Kaur, who wrote a book called See No Stranger. And it is this idea of revolutionary love. It's the love of Jesus. It's the love of the beloved community of Gandhi. It's the love of Martin Luther King. It's that kind of love of everyone. And so there are different practices that help us to come back into that knowing and awareness that we are all part of the one human family. And so this month we've been talking about grief as an act of revolutionary love. And I want to share with you a piece of a letter from Home Office that references the Derrick Chauvin trial that happened this week as he was convicted on 3 counts. Well, he was convicted of murdering George Floyd. And so I just want to share a little bit about Home Office. From Home Office, it says, "We know that love is still the most powerful energy in the universe. As one of the many names of the divine, we invoke divine love to keep our thoughts, actions, and words rooted in our oneness, so that as a human race, we come to embrace a new reality where racial equity and social justice are the operating norms in society. We understand that when we stand for the dignity and safety of others, we ourselves come into a deeper understanding of our oneness and shared sacred heritage. We have faith that the consciousness of oneness we are calling in is what transforms the unjust into the just, separation into unity, and empowers each of us to co-create safe and healthy communities for us all." And so that is from our Home Office. And I feel like it's kind of creating maybe the context, the structure for our conversation today as we talk about grief as an act of revolutionary love. And so this month we've been talking about grieving our own grief. And God knows there's been a lot of that through COVID. We've talked about how to sit with others as they grieve. And today we're going to talk about what it means to grieve with those we don't even know, to grieve with so-called strangers and others, and how that can open up to a greater understanding of our oneness and our unity. And so I've got a wonderful panel that's going to join me, dear, dear friends of mine, and I am going to invite at this time Reverend George Stewart. of the Center for Spiritual Living, Greater Boston, living in California. I don't know. We got all kinds of stuff going here, George. And I'm thrilled again. Here you are in a whole other time zone joining us. And I'm so excited this technology allows you to be with us. And I love you. And
well, my dear.
As we were, putting it out there, who wants to do our praying? It was like unanimous. We got to have George do it today because he's just such an amazing prayer warrior. And so I'm going to let you take it over, George.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rev Cindy. Oh, so let's just take in a deep and cleansing breath and get into that center of love. That revolutionary love that is beyond all understanding on the human level in so many ways. And just centering ourselves in that place of knowing that there is this infinite, universal, creative intelligence and power and presence and love that is filling all of life with itself. This presence and this power that I call the Mother, Father, God, that answers to so many names, Yahweh, Godhead, so many words that speak to what this energy is, and yet those words are not large enough to accept the fullness and the wholeness of what this presence is. And so as I recognize and I realize right here and right now, this one power, this one presence, this one life that is expressing itself individualized as me, and as each one on this beautiful panel, and as in each one who is a part of this beautiful community known as CSL Ocala, Center for Spiritual Living Ocala, and for all who join in, who listen in to this beautiful activity, I know that there is absolutely this infinite universal love that is imbuing all with the overflowing good of the universe. And so I know that all of the technology, every piece, every part of this activity, this panel, this discussion, this expression of beauty and light and love and sharing in this revolutionary grieving and love. Knowing that there is an absolute good that is revealed in this activity, I bless it all with joy and peace and ease and grace. And I just know that the infinite power of the one has made it so through its natural and active law of beauty and light and love and perfection and wholeness. So I can let these words rest in that sacred soil of that law, knowing that they have been fulfilled in this moment and brought forward into absolute, perfect expression. And so I say, blessed be, amen, ashe, aho, and so it is. Can't hear you. I can't hear you. I believe you're muted.
Thanks, George. I said I'm ready to rock and roll here. I feel energized and inspired, and then nothing came out. Thank you so much, George. Thank you for that beautiful, beautiful prayer. And I'm going to bring in our other panelists here. Hello, Reverend Rodney Gittins.
Hi, everybody.
Hello, my dear. Rodney joins us from the Center for Spiritual Living in Brooklyn, New York, called One Love Center for Spiritual Living. So we've got, where are you in California, George?
Palm Desert in 1,000 Trails Campground.
Wow, Palm Desert, Brooklyn. We're about to bring in Ocala with Corinne Dean, who is
Hello.
Hi, Corinne. Corinne's a member of the board at the Center for Spiritual Living, and she is my partner in peace building at Circle Up Center for Practical Peace Building. And we also have Donna Davis, who is hello, Donna.
Hello, can y'all hear me? I had to switch out.
Hear you very well.
Okay,
You're coming
good.
in loud and clear. And Donna's a practitioner at CSL Ocala. So thank you all. Thank you all for saying yes. And so I kind of set it up already, right? That conversation about grieving as I'd never really thought about it that way until I read See No Stranger. and Valerie speaking about grieving with others as a way to get to know them and to understand them and to love them. I get it. You know, I get how deep and profound that is. So, you know, she makes the point, we don't have to know people to grieve with them, but that grieving with others is a way to love them. So what do you all think about that idea?
I think that's a great idea. The experience I have of that is 9/11, and when we had Superstorm Sandy here in New York, there was a very different consciousness at work when the news was coming in about what was happening with people, especially 9/11. It seemed as though there was just mass effort to alleviate the pain of experiencing that. I mean, from around the country and around the world. I mean, on my block where I live, people had to walk home because public transportation was shut down, and there was an outpouring, a very natural outpouring of people just giving water or letting people use their bathroom and just being available and being of service in a very natural way. You know, there wasn't discussion about it. As I watched the news later on, I found out that was happening all over. And there was this collective sense of responsibility and well-being for everyone. You know, just like, hey, we're here for you. We don't know you, but we're here for you. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind for me.
Yeah, thank you, Rodney. Thank you. Yeah, Donna, you probably a similar experience in New York, didn't you? I mean, of people reaching out, you know, and
it was more like people were reaching out to us, and then we had nurses from all over the country that we just kept checking in with each other, like, you know, where are you from? I'm from here, hailing from here, by way of here. I had never said that before. I'm from Ocala by way of Jamaica. You know, and that became like a thing. I am from Brooklyn by way of Bahamas, you know, wherever you were born. And I had never experienced that before. And there was this camaraderie that happened in the grief of losing patients and and worrying about your family and trying just to keep yourself healthy, because you'd be locked down. Nobody wanted to be quarantined. I mean, they were serious about that quarantine. So, you know, and then we did grieve someone if we found out, hey, that person had to go to quarantine. It was like, oh my God, you know. So it was a different kind of, it was more like a camaraderie in our grief together, if that makes sense, because we all understood the pain of our backs hurting and our feet hurting and the people hated us and the da-da-da-da-da, you know, but together we grieved it.
Yeah. You know, Valerie talks in the book. I'm glad you brought up 9/11 because that reminded me. I mean, that's what this whole chapter was based on in her story, was the first people to really experience the hate crimes after 9/11 was the Sikh community, because they wore turbans, and so people thought they were Muslim, and that was her unfolding as a peace activist. She grabbed her camera and went all over the country, and I can't think of his name. She calls him Bobir Singh, was the first one in that was someone related, you know, in her family. And he had been working in a convenience store, you know, that he owned, and he was shot outside as he was planting a garden. I mean, it just such a sad story. And Valerie went actually to India and met with his widow and interviewed her and asked her if she had any message for Americans. And Valerie thought this woman would be full of bitterness and anger. I mean, it was Americans that took her husband's life. And she said, thank them for the love that they offered. You know, when she came to the country, and she was just surrounded, you know, by loving people who had never met her husband yet were reaching out to her in her time of grief to uplift her, and that was her takeaway of from the American people. And so
it's crazy. I feel that way too as an immigrant, because it's like when you hear of all this pain and racism and all of that, I'm looking around at me and I'm like, how I'm not experiencing that. So what is everybody else seeing? But it's like the one person who does something gets this whole bubble around them that now encapsulates everybody who looks like them. And so now we are afraid of everybody who looks like them. And that's why people who are in pain tend to lash out at everybody who looks like them. And there's just more people in pain than we realized, you know? And I think that that's why I'm not seeing it, because I mean, I see it and I see it for the pain. And maybe that's why I'm not seeing it manifest as much in my life. But I know it's there because I hear about it, you know?
Wow.
You know, that's a great point, because what we do identify is the feelings. You know, the stories are so different, and we can't connect with those individual stories, where you're from and all that. But the feeling that we all share, I mean, there's nothing new under the sun. We have those feelings that's where we're in touch. That's our soul. That's our spirit. And I think that's how one of maybe the only ways we get to connect in going through grief. Like I mean, I did know a couple of people that actually died in 9/11. However, for the most part, I didn't know those thousands of people. I didn't, or on a plane, or however, we still find some way to connect, and it connects through that grief. Without having to name it as that, we don't think about it that way, right? Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Or we hadn't thought about it that way until somebody brings it to your attention.
Yeah.
Really, I had not thought of the idea of grieving with other people, with strangers, as really an act of love, but it is, because it makes you vulnerable too. Right? Yeah. I think we have a hard enough time, many of us, with our own grief, right? To say, I'm going to sit with you in yours. I think that's what makes it the revolutionary love.
I think it's even more of a challenge, honestly, when you have to sit in that grief when you have no idea what they're going through. So like if somebody lost a parent, for example, you can have an imagination that this would be, oh, if I lost my parent, this is what it would feel like. So you can relate. But let's say you have somebody who is being hateful, and that's their outward expression of their grief. And now you are standing, especially if they're like dementiated, like in our case with nurses, you have somebody that's dementiated and they don't realize their partner is gone and they're looking for them desperately. I don't know what that's like to be in that world. And so I'm kind of like just standing, and there's tons of other times that somebody's going through something. How do we learn to just sit in presence, because we have no clue what they're going through? Yes. And I think that's when it comes in handy, when that grief comes out to you as rage.
Well, that's another. We'll be talking about that one. I got a whole month on rage. Interesting thought, right? A peace building curriculum that has a whole segment on rage. But yeah, go ahead, Rev G.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we talk about this global grief that we're going through. My experience in grief has been, that I have lost 2 husbands. And I have been through, the counseling sessions. Of course, that makes Rev Ed very nervous because, after you bump off 2 husbands, who's next? But anyway, but it's interesting because when I think about it, I remember that the first time that I was involved in like a grief group, I would go to a grief group. It was at the Desert AIDS Project right here in the desert where we are right now. And it was a group of men who had lost their partners. And I was in the same place as them in some ways, in that I understood what it was like to lose a partner, and especially lose a partner. This was back in the 90s when there was still a lot of prejudice against gay couples, even here in the desert. As a matter of fact, my first partner's doctor refused to recognize me. I had to ask the nurses what was going on with him, and they put him into hospice without my knowledge. So there was all of these pieces that were a part of that. And so it was like when you were in that group, you had the empathy because you were all in that same place. And yet I found myself being a presence of love and light more so in that group. And I felt that they were also being that to me. So it became that interconnected love that was beyond what we could even imagine, in both cases, because I went there twice, because with my second husband after losing him, and I just felt like for me, it was to be present for others as well as myself. And I think that that's what it's really about when we're talking about grief. It is about that give and take, even though we may not understand that grief that they're going through. We see that grief and we see it unfolding. And you can empathize with that, you can, and having that empathy of, I can't say it's exactly like this, like what you said, Donna, about your mother, about losing a parent, and yet it doesn't matter. I can still go through that with you if I choose to be that presence of love.
It speaks to oneness. It lets us know that connection is it's always there. I mean, it's never not there. It's always there. I think that's really what allows us, especially when we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, to feel that okay, not that experience, however, to feel like, I mean, I can only imagine that if I found out about some traumatic experience that happened 10 years ago and I just find out about it now, I could go through a period of grief over that happened 10 years ago, because of the feelings that are in me that I identify as, and so, yeah, I don't have to know anything about anybody that happened so long ago. Like, I think there's a movie coming up about the Tulsa Riots back in the 1920s, and it wasn't so much a riot, it's more of a murder, slaughter, genocide. And when I just thought yesterday that, there's a movie coming up, tears were welling up inside of me. I have no connection to that, what happened over 100 years ago, but I still felt it, and I think that's kind of like what you're talking about.
And thank you, Robbie. Oh, go ahead, Corinne.
Okay, sorry. I know, and let me know if I'm having technical difficulties today, so give me a hand signal if you can't hear me.
Yeah.
But Reverend Rodney, what you were saying too, we may not understand the experience, but we can understand the emotion. We all have, well, I'm assuming most people watching or that are on this call have experienced some sense of loss or even anger, because anger can cause grief as well. And so we all understand that emotion. It's what makes us human, these emotions of ours. So that brings us together.
And there is that vulnerability, right, of allowing yourself, because when you can allow yourself to feel somebody else's pain, it touches a place inside of you. Right. So I think most of us are really compassionate, empathetic people. Everybody on this, right, on this call. I know you all, right? We've all been and I actually, I found myself today, and I really, really, truly feeling grateful for so much of the crap that I went through that was so painful at the time, because it opened my heart, that I have a compassion and I can feel people, Some people say, I see you, right? I hear you. Well, I feel you.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you all, are like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's,
Yeah.
a great thing about being this empathetic person, but at the same time, like to read stories about kids on the border, or, you mentioned it the other day, Corinne, and it's just, it feels like so much like I don't want to think about it. I don't want to look at it. I'm going to ignore it. There's a piece of me that wants to do that. Right. Because it hurts so much.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's the other part of me that knows that it is vital to allow that feeling in, because it's part of our humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And not doing it, not allowing ourselves to feel whatever it is that we feel, that pain, allows for those injustices to continue. Does that make sense? Right? Because we're not,
Correct.
I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to feel that. Well, it's somebody else's problem. No, it's everybody's.
It's still everybody's problem.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What about the relationship of love? Like, how does love relate to grief or freedom? Like, like grief has the appearance of a spiritual practice. And so then if there's something spiritual about grief, would you say that somehow it's connected to love or freedom?
Oh yeah, that was the first week. Let me see if this is the quote. Let me toss it up here. No, yeah, it is. Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It's an emotional, physical, and spiritual necessity. It's the price we pay for love, right? The only cure for grief is to grieve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But you have to first realize that grief is at your door.
Yeah.
You have to let it in. Some people go running around their house and putting up barricades against grief.
Well, that's what we're taught in society. We're taught in society to get it over.
Mm-hmm.
I remember one time hearing somebody, why don't you just get over it? There was one guy who was coming to our group who had been coming for 7 years. And somebody actually said that. And I was like going, no, that's not right. And I had to speak up and say, no, I don't care if it's the next 10 years. I don't care if it's the next 30 years. Grief is an ongoing process.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes it starts over. It like you don't realize, you go through like the initial shock type of grief. Then you go through okay, I'm getting used to her not being here. It's almost been a year since mom's left the planet. So I'm upon the anniversary and I'm thinking, whoa, the grief has changed. And I know 10 years from now, the grief will be different because I'm still grieving my dad who passed when I was 18. So it just morphs, but it's still there. And I love that quote that said it's the price you pay for love, because now when I grieve, I take that day and I think about them. What would they be doing right now? What she'd be saying. I listen to video. Oh my gosh. Momi used to send us these amazing audios, requesting food or whatever else. She'd leave us messages on our phones. And did you know, because Norma never throws anything away on her phone, she has every single one of them.
Mm.
And I have audio after audio after audio of baby, when you're coming home, so that kind of celebratory love, then I share it with others, like my sister and Norma and the kids, and we all together celebrate. And it's grief still, but it's like a celebratory grief. It's kind of weird, but it's still grief. It just morphed.
Are you saying you wouldn't experience the love if you didn't go through the grief in that situation?
Well, if I didn't go through that first leg of the grief, which was the sorrow part of it, if I didn't go through that, I wouldn't be at the celebratory part. It started to morph into the celebration of her life instead of, oh my God, my mom's not here. So the grief just kind of was different. Like the first amount of grief was the ripping you apart kind of grief, the shock of it all. And then the second kind of grief is that I'm getting kind of sort of used to it, but I'm still raw. And so you kind of go through every single step of grief again. And then, bam, I'm kind of sort of used to it. But hey, let's think about how awesome it was when she was here. Now you're celebrating too. And then you're taking people along for the ride, you know, your family members, your friends, whatever, you know, the entire world, you know, because we do still celebrate Martin Luther King.
Yeah. And you can be in, you know, you have to know where you are in your process, right? So there were people for you when you were in that, as you said, that kind of tearing down, the real deep sorrow part of it, people there to lift you. And maybe now you can be there to lift somebody else when they're in a different place, right? Like,
Bingo.
you know, it's the give and the take. Yeah. And sometimes I saw a message that, you know, that the pain is, your own pain is so great that, you know, to speak of it brings it back up, you know, like if it was just happening, it could have been 10 years ago, but it's happening again. And there is so much that we are going through collectively as a nation, right? That there are things that we have never grieved, that we've never acknowledged, right? So people, you're talking about the Tulsa massacre, you know, Rodney, like there are people that don't even know that happened.
Right.
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 And these things, but yet there are families that are carrying the pain of that, you know, in their family systems, you know, in their DNA even, that has never been acknowledged. And that's why we're so sick, I think, you know, as a culture, as a society, because there are all these things that we've not grieved, that, you know, you should be over it already. That happened years ago, you know, and it's not been given expression.
Yeah. You know, Cindy, I just saw a comment by Denise. She said, many want to avoid you when you are grieving. That's been her experience. So that's why we do that shutdown thing that says, don't show people the grief, because you don't want them to run away screaming from the building, because you make them uncomfortable. They have to think about their own vulnerability when you're in that grieving process. So you make them very uncomfortable. And if they haven't dealt with their grieving, guess what? It's going to come back, and then their pain's back. So let me just avoid you. You know?
So that's why I see that love is a major component. I mean, we know in all things. However, we usually don't, like, would I grieve over somebody I so-called didn't love? Maybe not like, but still. Like, what is grief based on? Like, you know, isn't it still based on love? And how I think how we can, let's say, okay, I love myself. How's that song go? I love myself so much that I can love you so much.
Yep.
And so if you are a stranger on the other side of the planet, and I don't know what's going on in that flood in Japan or whatever, the love that I know that I have, that I am, and the love that, because we're all one, right? We're all one. So therefore, there's a direct connection of that love as a foundation for grief to be spread wherever it needs to be spread or felt. So to me, like Donna, you started from a place of love, and that's why you felt grief in the first place.
Right.
And then apply the grief on the foundation of love, right? In a healthy way. Because if we're not, and you're saying if we're not healthy and we're hiding from the grief for whatever reason, whether it's our own, not want to get in touch with ourselves, or afraid of people will not want to be around us, then yeah, that's not a healthy way to express love or grief. Am I making any sense?
Yeah, but that's when support groups are so awesome, you know, that you can reach out to people, you know, any kind of support group, any kind of tribe, any kind of mentor, you know, just somebody that when you reach out to the right people, not just, oh, let me just tell everybody all about my grief, because not everybody's in a position to hold you. You know, I believe it was Reverend Wada said that you're too heavy for them. They are going to disappoint you. You know, so you have to have a discerning spirit as to who it is you're sharing your most vulnerable grief with. And then those people help and hold you up. And that's why support groups are so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're the internet.
Well, I think maybe the challenges and everybody's in a different place in their journey, right? Like
Mhm.
you, Donna, you've had a lot of grief. You got a lot of muscle. So really it's no wonder that you're a nurse and that you do what you do because you can handle that for people, right?
Yes.
The same thing. And we got ministers, right? That's what we do.
Mhm.
Come to me with your problems. So you
Yeah.
work through our own stuff. We have a friend who was telling me the other day after listening, there was the Chauvin verdict, right? He got guilty
Mhm.
as charged. And so for some people that was cause for celebration,
Mhm.
right? I don't see it that way. At the same
I
time,
don't either.
there was a 15-year-old girl that was killed right as that was all happening. And she said, you know what? I sang and I danced and I cried just all to myself, sang, danced, and cried and just let it go, And I thought how beautiful that is, because we are all connected. Like to be able to take that on, that pain of somebody else's intentionally and work through it. I think that we help others at the same time. It feels like I'm just working through my own grief, but you working through your grief is helping other people,
Yeah.
or that you're going to be there for somebody at a point in their, when they need it in their
Mhm.
journey.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Well, I loved what you said,
It all
Cindy,
does.
about the the Chauvin. When those results came forward, I felt joy for those people who needed to hear that and that it was a part of that. But I also felt so sad for him in that he somehow has lost a piece of who he is in that 9.5 minutes that he just could not bring himself back to his humanity in that time. And it broke my heart on all sides. I feel absolutely the George Floyd thing, but I also feel like, wow, you've lost so much of yourself in that short period of time.
Mhm.
It's a long period of time for all of us because I think many of us are still grieving that loss, having
Mhm.
had to watch that. And it was on the news. It was all over the place. It's been, we've seen it over and over and over again. And so it is that continuous grieving process of watching that man lose his life to someone else, and knowing that someone else has somehow lost who he is in that
Mhm.
time.
Yeah.
So it's a huge amount of grieving, and
Mhm.
it's learning to love beyond, because you have to love all people, and that's the challenge sometimes,
Yeah.
is to love everyone.
So for me, I know that I asked myself that question when dealing with patients and doing the COVID nursing thing. And I thought, okay, how can I be most effective? I can get in front of the thing as much as possible. And that's why the peace building is so important, because we are grieving every time someone loses their freedom or someone else loses a life. No matter what they're Black, white, Puerto Rican, Muslim, it doesn't matter. The fact is, it's still the same amount of grief. So for me, it's getting in front of why that happened to begin with. And it happened because someone lost control of their humanity in that moment. And how do we talk to the grief that's there? So, when I started doing contact tracing, that was to be able to prevent COVID as much as possible to lessen the numbers in the hospital. So now we're doing the peace building. We're doing these conversations. We're doing, see the dog, see this, because you're speaking truth. You're doing, we're getting in front of this thing so that we can then hopefully impact enough people that maybe, just maybe, one or two people who may have made a decision can choose a different path. And that's why we're doing what we're doing. And this is how we are attacking the grief from in front of it, I guess. Does that
Yeah,
make sense?
it does.
That
Can I say, I want
I
to
just want to say
share.
something really quickly that reminds me of how planet Earth is being treated, and how we grieve for when you hear the Amazon forest is
Mm-hmm.
being deforested like a football field a minute, is being cut down, and all these things that seemingly are out of our control. But like what you said, is how to get in front of it, how to deal with it, how to not just feel grief, but to be involved in a process. I don't even know how to finish that, but yeah, I just thought about grieving for, I mean, strangers, and then what? How do we
prevent it from happening again, so that we have to now grieve again? You know,
Right.
so it's like this roller coaster, like the grief compiles on top of itself. That's what 2020 was for me: grief after grief after grief after grief, compiling to where it felt like your back was gonna break, and something had to break.
Yeah.
And I believe that, I don't know, it's a cosmic shift or something that happened. And we just needed, it's kind of like when a mom's giving birth, it's messy, it's painful, but you have to go through it. You can't say, oh, I'm not going to feel this pain. I'm not going to go through it. I changed my mind. You want
Well,
to.
know, a good point about that, about COVID grief that just struck me just now. You know what that has done? It's given our globe a collective grief, something that we all share.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
everybody.
You know, we had that with 9/11, even though it happened on American soil. We had, you know, compassion from around the world for people who had experienced similar acts of terrorism and things like that. But this COVID, no one was targeted. This was just a global issue. And now we share that. You know, that's, in a strange way, that's kind of beautiful. We have a shared global experience that maybe
and we shared it with the animals.
Yeah.
And the earth itself was involved as well.
Yeah.
So now we get this amazing do-over, like not even a do-over, but like a pause and, you know, reflect. And now we can come from that space of love. So that's why I said there's this, it feels like it's starting to go forward again just a little bit.
It's a reminder that yes, we're all connected. We're all one.
Yeah.
It rains on the just and the unjust. I don't care how you put it. It's
Right.
you know, we're all affected.
That's
Not infected, affected.
Yeah, I want to bring it back to that the point of other, you know, the other people in you know, Chauvin and George Floyd. So I worked as a victim advocate many years ago, right, in the state attorney's office, and I can remember a case we had where it was a young man had killed his girlfriend's baby. Not like really intentionally. It was a child abuse situation. He was in over his head. I don't want to make excuses for the guy, but we ended up getting a guilty verdict, which meant death penalty. And so the team was going to go out and celebrate. And I was just sick. You know, like to me, there's nothing there to celebrate. I feel the same way with the Chauvin, right? You know, that I live in this world where I'm a brown skinned woman. I see that, experience that. In a world of law enforcement, right? Dad, husband, daughter, like all of that. And I straddle those worlds. And I just want to put the challenge out to people from whichever side you sit on to consider that other person and their grief, you know, like the grief of police officers, you know, in watching that, the grief of the African American community. If you're white, take that on. Imagine what it would feel like to be that mom. You know, if you're on the other side of it, imagine what it is to be a law enforcement officer and have to put that uniform on and have people, you know, hating you because of, you know, the uniform you put on. So that, you know, that's my challenge for each one of us as these, you know, we're working on our own spiritual growth, right? Is to just open ourselves up to the grief of that stranger or that other and try it on. You know, maybe you can only handle it for 5-10 minutes, right? You know, or like Teresa, for a whole song, I'm just going to sing and dance and cry and grieve this situation and just work it through, you know? Right? What if there were more of us that could do that would take that on? Let me see. I'm going to look at the comments here, and if you guys have anything to say as we're wrapping things up. Reverend Mary Ellen, I don't know anyone in India. However, my heart is aching for all life in India. seeing families without resources such as oxygen and loved ones dying and immediately being cremated. I'm grieving with the world while this great pause continues.
Yeah.
Let's see. And for those here, I'm scrolling back up, of people who feel like they've been ignored in their grief or that people turn away from them. You know, I think I'm just taking that as a message for myself too. Like, who do I know that may be grieving right now that I could reach out to and just say, I remember, I'm thinking about you, you know?
Yeah. And if you are grieving, drop into Facebook, man. Reach out with a messenger message. Reach out to one of us. Because if we see a messenger message that comes up and says, I am from blah, 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 and I watched you on Facebook, send a message. Reach out.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Well,
I
let's
want to say that there are people who are not in touch with their grief who need help with that, even though they wouldn't ask for it. So, you know, reaching out to them, and you don't have to call it, hey, are you grieving yet? You know, it's hey, you know, how you doing? You know, and we'll know,
right.
you know.
I'm here for you when you're ready. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Because
And
sometimes
maybe
we
not
have
even
no
that.
clue. Maybe
It's
we
just
have
like,
no idea what's going on, you know,
right.
like Rod's saying, you know, we may just be in our little cocoon and bubble and somebody's just lost someone. We have no clue.
Right. Right. Well, it looks like our time is wrapped up in this, you know, official part of our broadcast. But before you all sign off, if you would just, I don't know, as we close out this conversation on grief, next month we're going to be talking about fighting for other people. You know, fighting well, which means we got to know how to fight for ourselves too, right? And what that looks like in a way that expands love and peace for all of us. So that should be interesting conversation. Anyway, I'll toss it up to Rev G. You have anything you want to close with?
I think just that we all need to be that place of empathy and open to allow ourselves to share in anyone's grief that we feel around us. You know, sometimes it's reaching out in a place you never expect yourself to reach out in. You know, but stepping out and trusting that, you know, you'll be guided to be that presence with them.
Thank you.
Well, I have Grieving for Others. What's a broadcast without an acronym from Rodney? I have Group or Global. G is for Group or Global. Relief. Individually expressing freedom.
Nice.
Nice.
Thanks, Rodney.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
Let me write
post that.
Hang on a second. I'll put it in the we put it in the chat or something.
Absolutely.
Say it again. Group.
Relief. Individually expressing freedom.
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney.
That's good.
Yeah.
Who else? Donna? Corinne?
I'm thinking my closing thoughts on this are that even if we don't know the person who has died or has been convicted or any other life-changing situation, even if we don't know them or if we don't like them, channel that love that you have for people in your life and know that someone is suffering with that, with whatever has happened, and really focus on that and send your love to that person who is suffering, regardless of whether or not you know the person that has, whose life has changed forever.
Thank you.
Yeah. My closing thoughts on the matter is that I have gone through my own grief. I'm currently going through a new phase of it. And what I would say is, what I would ask for my friends is that when I reach out, like if somebody was to reach out to me, to just carve aside a little time bubble that you can be fully present, still honoring you who is in presence for that person. you know, because we all have busy lives. But I feel like if we can just carve out a little bit of time that we just focus in that moment, I believe that that would be helpful. And most people who are grieving, like I'm grieving, I'm going to say, hey, you know, I just need a little bit of your time, and I'm aware of it. And I feel special because you carved that out for me. So that's what I would say. And that way it doesn't become like a heavy burden on just one person. You know, you can carve out 10 minutes for a friend, or 15, or an hour, or whatever in your schedule.
Yeah. Thank you, Donna. And thank you, my beautiful people, for being with us this afternoon. And we'll see. I don't know who's going to be here next week, but I have a feeling there'll be at least a few of you here. Thanks again. Love you. And
Love you.
best wishes.
See you guys on Zoom. Please join us.
Well, oh yeah, let me say that too. Do join us. You know, we do our little after, you know, Zoom conversation afterward, and folks share their prayer requests and just continue the conversation. There might be some people needing some prayer, or, you know, just checking in, or even offering to pray and be there for you. So invite you all. You're welcome, Rev G and Rev Rod and Corinne, Donna, everybody. Love you. Thank you. See ya. All right. So that brings us to the next part of our service. I thank you all for being here and spending your time with us and sharing with friends. And our hope, of course, is that you're getting some tools and some things that will be very useful for you in your own life. And if you do, in fact, get things that are of, you know, helpful to you in your life, we just ask that you pass it on, you know, keep sharing the blessings. And I want to take this moment for us to talk about sharing our gifts and tithes. And, you know, we have an actual building, we have expenses, we are just like you know, even a church with walls. We actually do have walls. And so I just invite you, if these messages touch your heart, to consider making a tithe or making a donation to Center for Spiritual Living Ocala. And we've got some easy ways for you to do that. You can text to the number that is going across the screen, send text message from your smartphone to 352-320-5110. And what you do is put in the amount that you would like to send to the center. And when you hit send, it goes from your bank account to ours once it's set up. Or you can go to cslocala.org/donate. And so I invite you to make this affirmation yours. I'm going to say it out loud. And if you want to hold your hand to your heart, just make this yours. It is the nature of life to give of itself. As it is the tree's nature to bear fruit and the flower's nature to bloom, it is my nature to share the gifts of my time, talent, and treasure. I participate in the divine flow of life, giving generously and receiving abundantly. I am blessed and I am a blessing. I am so very grateful. And we are so very grateful for everyone who gives to Center for Spiritual Living Ocala. I guess I can do this quick announcement here. We're getting ready to invite another organization to share our space at CSL Ocala. It is called the Aura Clubhouse. We're very excited about what this means for not just our spiritual community, but for the Marion County Ocala community, as these two organizations kind of come together. And so there are some expenses around that, and I'm gonna, you know, invite you to, again, share your financial gifts with us so that we can make that transition nice and smooth. And let's see if there's any other comments here. Let me put up the Zoom information for those of you who would like to join us. I'm going to put it up here on the screen where you can see it. That number is 637-667-6847, and the password is spiritual. We invite you to join us. And I think that's it. So I'm going to go ahead and do our closing prayer. This comes from our friends at Unity, our sister organization, and the author is James Dillett Freeman. It is called The Prayer for Protection. The light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God protects us. And the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. And I just pray that all is well in your world and that any obstacles turn into stepping stones to your greater yet to be. And I look forward to seeing you all next week and maybe on our Zoom call. Have a fabulous week, everybody.